Welcome to the 2014 Reversing Diabetes World Summit with your host, diabetes educator and IFM certified functional medicine practitioner, Dr. Brian Mole.
Hello friends, welcome back. It's Dr. Brian Mole. I have with me today a very special guest, an incredible doctor named David Jockers. And Dr. Jockers is going to be discussing with us today the keys to implementing a ketogenic diet. But before we get started with that, I want to give everyone a reminder to please register for the Diabetes Summit by entering your name and email on the homepage. That way you'll have emails from us. We'll keep you in the loop on everything we're doing, and you won't miss a single presentation. Also, if you haven't done it yet, please like our Facebook page by clicking the like button in the upper right-hand corner of the homepage. Thanks again, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. David Jockers. Dr. Jockers is a maximized living doctor, nutritionist, exercise physiologist, and certified strength and conditioning specialist. He currently owns and operates Exodus Health Center in Kennesaw, Georgia. His experience working with thousands of individuals has given him a level of expertise in the field. He's a member of the Performance Enhancement Team for Maximized Living Wellness Advisory Council, where he had the privilege of traveling to London to help the USA athletes win the gold in 2012. He is a leading writer for Natural News, Natural Health 365, Organic Lifestyle Magazine, and Primal Docs, which are four of the top online health publications in the world. He's also on the expert panel for the popular South African Journal of Natural Medicine, and he has well over 1,000 professionally published natural health articles all over the internet and in print magazines. Dr. Jockers is the author of the best-selling book, Supercharge Your Brain, the complete guide to radically improve your mood, memory, and mindset. Dr. Jockers is a sought-after speaker around the country on topics such as weight loss, brain health, functional exercise, natural detoxification, and disease prevention. We're lucky and blessed to have him today with us to talk about how to implement a ketogenic diet. Dr. Jockers, welcome.
Hey, Dr. Brian, great to be on with you today.
Awesome. So let's start off talking about a ketogenic diet. What is it? Why do you think it's a good diet for diabetics to follow?
Well, a ketogenic diet, basically when we break that down, what it really means is that our body, we have two major energy sources that our body uses. It burns glucose, or we call that sugar, or it can burn ketone bodies, or we call that fat. And so we're either going to burn sugar or we're going to burn fat. Now, the majority of people are primarily burning sugar or glucose as their number one energy source. What we want to do is really switch it and turn our body into a fat-burning machine where we really run off of ketones. And so really a ketogenic diet is where we become fat-adapted and our body becomes very, very efficient and effective at burning fat as its primary energy source.
All right, I understand the idea of burning fat rather than sugar. Can you talk a little bit more about ketones and what a ketone is?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we break down fatty acids, they break down into these things called ketone bodies. And the three major forms of ketones that are produced by our body include acetoacetate, acetone, and beta-hydroxybutyric acid. And so these are released into the blood from the liver when insulin levels are down. And so, the diabetic population, most of us have heard of insulin. And so insulin raises when sugar is up. And so when sugar levels stay low or stable, insulin goes down. And then our body starts utilizing ketones as its primary energy source. Particularly the major ketone that we use is beta-hydroxybutyrate or beta-hydroxybutyric acid.
Okay, so what's the advantage of burning ketones rather than, as you said, burning sugar?
Yeah, so basically when we're burning sugar, we're going to constantly have blood sugar imbalances. And so we're going to have issues with insulin and stress hormone, such as cortisol. And over time, we produce more inflammation and really just hormonal dysregulation. Whereas ketone bodies are a very, very efficient energy source for our body to utilize. And so we actually, when we become keto adapted or fat adapted, and ketones and fat are our primary fuel source, we become very efficient at storing and preserving protein and glycogen. And so you look at an example like somebody that's got severe diabetes, uncontrolled diabetes, they'll have a lot of muscle wasting because they have very poor protein preservation in their lean body tissue. As opposed to somebody who's keto adapted, they will actually, even though they're not consuming tremendous amounts of protein, their body actually preserves lean body tissue more effectively. It also preserves stored carbohydrate, which we call glycogen, more effectively in the liver and the muscle. And when we're at rest, we are basically just breaking down sugar. So most people are breaking down, we're pretty much just breaking down ketones or fats when we're at rest. Most people, when they're at rest, they're breaking down, believe it or not, a lot of sugar and a lot of protein. When they have blood sugar dysregulation, their body actually becomes catabolic, and they'll break down proteins and amino acids and utilize that as an energy source. And so at night, while they're in a fasted state, their body is basically catabolic. It's breaking down its own muscle tissue. Whereas when we become fat adapted and we're running off these ketones, we preserve the muscle mass and we're burning fat more effectively. And so this idea of really burning fat at night while we're sleeping and while we're resting is really foundational to this ketogenic nutritional approach.
All right, and that is extremely important because when someone becomes pre-diabetic or they evolve into a full-blown type 2 diabetic, or they have metabolic syndrome with high blood pressure, high glucose, high cholesterol, and they're overweight, one of the things that is central to all these conditions is insulin resistance. They develop insulin resistance, have a hard time burning fat because they have what's called hyperinsulinemia. The insulin levels in their bloodstream are too high. And so the sugar builds up outside of the cell rather than getting into the cell to be burned for fuel. And having some sort of alternative energy source, I would think, would be really important. And anything you can do to try to burn fat and decrease the need for insulin would be helpful.
Yeah, without a doubt. And what's amazing is that our brain actually runs very, very well off ketones. And it's very much a natural state. In fact, I was actually reading an article that talked a lot about how infants are in a natural state of ketosis because even though breast milk does have sugar in it, it's still mostly fat. That breast milk itself is about 60 to 70% fat. And so that's really in that ketogenic range. And it's really only about 10 to 15% carbohydrate, 10 to 15% protein. And so newborn infants are in this state of ketosis and they're growing fast. They're really healthy and strong. And we look at other cultures like the Eskimos, for example, and the Maasai tribe. And these are tribal people who ate primarily fats as really was the foundational component of their diet. Eskimos, I mean, it's like 80% of their calories come from fatty acids, and they don't have metabolic disease. They don't have cardiovascular disease. On the Maasai tribe in Africa, again, 70 to 80% of their calories from fats, and again, no metabolic disease. So, you really get those benefits where your body becomes great at burning fat. It improves your brain function. It actually allows your brain to function really, really well. And you actually upregulate a neurotransmitter called GABA. You have more optimal ratios of your neurotransmitters, which gives you more emotional balance and stability. When your blood sugar is going up and down and your body's producing a lot of insulin and cortisol and stress hormones, you're going to have issues with neurotransmitter signaling. You're going to have more issues with mental emotional balance. You may have more issues with anger, with frustration, depression, issues like that. And so when you become fat adapted through this ketogenic nutritional approach, you become much more emotionally balanced. You sleep better at night. Life in general is better. Your quality of life is significantly better. And so as a clinician, I really believe that really everybody on the planet would do well being on some sort of a cyclic ketogenic diet for at least a period of time in their life.
All right, well, that's great information and exciting. Let's talk a little bit more about what a ketogenic diet actually looks like. And you mentioned the word cyclic ketogenic diet. So tell me a little bit more about what that is.
Yes. So basically a ketogenic diet, if we were to break down our macronutrients, well, I'll describe it in a couple different ways. The first way we'll look at it is really breaking down macronutrients. Our major macronutrients are fat, protein, and carbohydrates. And so the nutrition plan more or less looks like this. We want 60 to 80% of our total calories coming from healthy fat sources. This is going to be things like avocados, coconut oil, coconut butter, coconut flakes, all the different coconut products, extra virgin olive oil, pastured butter, meaning butter from grass-fed cows and goats, nuts like macadamia nuts or almonds, pecans, seeds like chia seeds, hemp seeds, flax seeds, as well as fatty portions of meat like organ meats, stock bones, and then, grass-fed pastured eggs, grass-fed beef, organic poultry, things like that, where we're going to get a lot of good fats from those sources. Then we take about 10 to 15% of our calories from carbohydrates, and really anywhere from 10 to 25% of our calories from protein. And so it really depends on how active the individual is. So for example, somebody like myself that exercises regularly, so I'm doing strength training, I really want more like 20% of my calories coming from protein. Whereas somebody that's more sedentary, or perhaps they just, their form of exercise is going out and taking a walk, they need less protein. So maybe more 10 to 15% of their calories coming from protein. But really we want to keep that carbohydrates somewhere between the range of 10 to 15% of our total calories. And things that are going to really make up our carbohydrate intake are going to be non-starchy vegetables, low glycemic fruit like lemons and limes and berries. And perhaps if we're really low on carbohydrates in a day, perhaps having something a little bit starchier, like maybe half of a sweet potato, something along those lines. And so it's really a grain-free diet that focuses around good fats. And that's the primary component in this nutrition plan. And when I talked about cyclic ketosis, what we're talking about there is we get in this state of ketosis, which really is going to take the average individual some time. So if you are a healthy, active individual, you might be able to get into ketosis in about 2 to 3 days, some level of mild ketosis, and then after about a week or two into full ketotic state, full keto adapted. If you have diabetes or metabolic disease, it's really going to take you probably about 2 or 3 weeks to get there, just because your body has a lot more work to do. There's a lot of inflammation in the system. It's going to take your body a longer period of time to change and adapt. But certainly you'll get there. And so you just got to stick with it, and you'll move in that direction. And then when we break down the meal plan, one of the great things about being on a ketogenic diet is you really aren't hungry all the time. We have this kind of mainstream approach where we're told to eat 5 or 6 meals a day. But, and as a personal trainer in the past, I used to recommend this. What I realize now is that that's one of the worst things we can be doing for our hormones. And so what's going to be a lot better is actually eating less. And so when we get into this keto adapted state, we really aren't hungry too often. Like for myself, I really eat 2 meals a day. And I do something called intermittent fasting, where I'll fast really for about 16 to 18 hours every single day and just drink lots of fluids during that period of time. And then I eat my meals between a 6 to 8 hour eating window. And I'm never hungry. I feel great all day long. In fact, sometimes when I'm fasting, I feel my best. And I'm not driven by food. And the food that I eat because it's loaded with good fats. It's very satisfying. It tastes great. And overall, just my quality of life is significantly improved from when I used to eat a lot of carbohydrates and used to eat, several meals throughout the day. And so the cyclic component comes in where, there may be like one day a week where we consume a little bit more grains, right? Maybe a grain, like a healthy grain like brown rice or quinoa, or maybe sweet potatoes, something along those lines. But, you really wouldn't want to do it more than once a week. And then you get right back into, again, high-fat diet, right back into ketosis. So having kind of one meal a week where you splurge a little bit on carbs to really just carb load your system. It pulls you out of ketosis, but it actually enhances your body's ability to load glycogen or load stored sugar and carbohydrate in your muscles and liver. And then you go right back into the ketogenic diet, 60 to 80% of your calories coming from fats. It actually enhances your overall quality of life. It enhances your thyroid function, so increases metabolism when you do this. And if you're an athlete, you'll notice significant improvements because you'll be able to store more glycogen. And so you'll notice athletic improvements at your next training meet or competition.
Wow, very cool. This is obviously quite different than what's recommended by the American Diabetes Association. What's wrong with the ADA diet that most doctors and dietitians are recommending for their diabetic patients?
Well, there's a lot of things that are wrong with it. So I'll start with the first one is that it's a heavy carbohydrate diet. And so the carbohydrates, again, are going to they're going to create a metabolic mechanism where our body continues to depend upon carbohydrates. And so we're not training our body to become an effective fat burner. And so although the ADA does recommend low glycemic carbohydrates, nevertheless, we're still not training our body to burn the fat. And so the way that we train our body to burn fat is by eating, again, this high fat diet. So that's number one, is too many carbohydrates. Number two is that diet really, the sweeteners that they focus on are also toxic. And so there's a lot of, it's very chemical based rather than whole food based. And so they're going to use things like aspartame, Splenda, things that research has shown are damaging to our gut microflora. They're damaging to our brain cells. They have carcinogenic links. So they're using a lot of chemicals and not real foods. So that's number two. And then number three is, again, this kind of dependency upon eating throughout the day. Just eating 5, 6 small meals throughout the day is not really the most effective approach. Okay, we want to really focus on the fats, get our ketone levels, and really train our body to being, again, a great fat burner. And eating 5 to 6 meals a day is not the most effective way to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I almost find it sickly comical to look at some of the diabetes magazines in the grocery store shelves, and for some reason it seems like every single one of them has a chocolate cake or a plate of cookies or something like that on the cover. It's almost as if they're trying to dumb it down for diabetics as much as possible and say, well, they're not really going to do what they're supposed to do, so let's just try to find ways to limit the damage as much as possible using things like artificial sweeteners, bending the rules. A couple of years ago, the ADA did attempt a low-calorie program, and it went down blazing as a failure because they just felt like it wasn't successful, that people weren't able to do it, and they stopped recommending it. And I think part of the problem is that a lot of doctors, dietitians don't have the knowledge base like you do about these alternative diets that really work for diabetics to be able to help them implement it and get through some hurdles. So let's talk about how to do this. let's talk about your secrets for implementing eating a high-fat diet. I'm sure there's better fats. Some fats are better than others. You mentioned some carbohydrates that are good carbohydrates versus the processed breads and cereal grains and so forth. Where do we begin when we're trying to implement a ketogenic diet into our life to control our blood sugar?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so what I tell people to do is to start like this. You know, if somebody is already, let's say you're a coffee drinker, which from my experience, many diabetics are. And so if you're a coffee drinker, here's what we want to do. In the morning, you start your day, and instead of your typical coffee, certainly you want to get like an organic, ideally a mold-free coffee. So get an organic coffee. So you're reducing pesticides. Anytime you're reducing just environmental toxins in general, you're going to lower your inflammatory load on your body. And, as we know that diabetes is really a disease of chronic inflammation in the body. And so we definitely want to go with organic-based coffee. Coffee beans, your typical commercial coffee beans are the most heavily sprayed, one of the most heavily sprayed plants. And so going with some sort of an organic mold-free coffee. And then all you do is you put in a couple tablespoons of coconut oil, and you can also put in some tablespoons of pastured butter in it. And I know a lot of times when people hear about this, they're like, oh, they kind of do a double take. But actually, you don't want to knock it until you try it. Everybody that tries this, they tell me this is the best tasting coffee they've ever had. So it's a very high fat coffee, and coffee actually has, a lot of antioxidants that enhance blood sugar stabilization anyways. In fact, green coffee bean extract is a supplement that's growing in popularity, has a powerful effect. The chlorogenic acid in there, a very powerful effect for enhancing blood sugar sensitivity. So, if you're already a coffee drinker, it's something you enjoy, you don't have to get rid of that. All you need to do is get an organic coffee, and you really make your breakfast around this coffee. You put coconut oil, you put pastured butter in it. If you wanted it, I guess you could say just more creamy, you could use a full-fat organic coconut milk that you can get in a can and put that in there and put a lot of good fats in there. And what people notice when they do that is that it really satisfies them. They don't feel hungry for quite a while. And the reason why is you've got this combination of caffeine, antioxidants in the coffee, along with the medium chain fats, these MCTs, medium chain triglycerides, that turn very quickly and rapidly into these ketones. And the ketones, again, enhance overall brain function. They make you feel good. You have a lot of energy. And you really don't feel hungry. They give you that feeling of satisfaction. So do something as simple as that. If you don't like coffee, maybe you like hot chocolate. You could do the same thing with hot chocolate. You could take a can of coconut milk. You kind of boil it up, get it warm. And then from there, once it cools a little bit, go ahead and put some raw chocolate, organic raw cacao, ideally fair trade organic raw cacao. The chocolate industry uses slaves quite often, and clearly we don't want to be a part of that. So getting fair trade organic chocolate, putting that in, flavoring it up with some stevia, tastes amazing. If it's summertime, you don't want something warm, then you can make chocolate milk. Very simple. It's actually easier than the hot chocolate. You just take your coconut milk, you take your raw chocolate, you put that in there, a little bit of stevia, you're good to go. Unless you are a high-level athlete, you really don't need a whole lot of protein in the morning time. Not that big a deal. So getting the good fats will actually enhance the benefits of fasting. When you get the good fats in there, these medium chain fats, they don't block growth hormone secretion. So your body gets the benefits of intermittent fasting, which means higher levels of growth hormone. And growth hormone is your quintessential anti-aging hormone. It helps you burn fat. It helps you build muscle. It helps produce collagen, which improves your skin texture, your bones. It helps your immune system. So you get a lot of really good benefits from that. So anyways, that's what I typically recommend, is do something as simple as that. Drink coffee with coconut oil or pastured butter, or you could do your chocolate milk with full-fat coconut milk and raw chocolate. If you did want some sort of a real food, you could do a protein shake with full fat organic coconut milk, or you could use organic almond milk and put in some coconut fat. So put in a couple tablespoons of coconut oil, or you could use MCT oil, medium chain triglyceride oil, which is just a little bit more processed coconut oil, where it actually focuses specifically on the 8 and 10 carbon chain fats that are in the coconut oil, and your body derives energy from that quite effectively. So MCT oil or coconut oil. You could put a small amount of frozen organic berries. That's fine. You might get about 10 grams of carbohydrate or so out of that. And then you put about 15 to 20 grams of quality low carbohydrate protein powder in there. You really don't want much more than that. The average adult you want, really is going to really want about 60 to 80 grams of carbohydrates, perhaps, maybe 50 to 80 grams of carbohydrates, depending on your size, or I'm sorry, of protein, I should say, depending upon your size. So 50 to 80 grams of protein in a course of a day, depending upon your size. If you're obviously larger, over 150 pounds, more like 65 to 80 grams of protein. If you're under 150 pounds, more like 50 to 65 grams of protein. And you want to keep your carbohydrates around that 50 gram level. Again, it's really actually about the same. So if you're under 150 pounds, between that 50 to 65 grams is usually where you're going to be. If you're over 150 pounds, between that 65 to 80 grams altogether throughout the day. So as we keep going here, Brian, so if you wanted a solid food meal, you could do eggs. You could cook some organic pastured eggs in coconut oil and have that with vegetables for breakfast. So that's another great breakfast option. How about lunch? When we look at lunch, you could do things like guacamole with coconut milk, lemon, apple cider vinegar, and herbs. So like I have a recipe for lemon creamy superfood guacamole, which is creamy because I add more good fat. I put coconut milk in there. So because a really, really creamy guacamole, and it's super satisfying. I mean, you have that with a couple flax crackers or maybe some red cabbage, celery, cucumbers dipped into it. It tastes great. The apple cider vinegar, the herbs, the lemon in there taste fantastic. It's creamy. It's extremely satisfying. Love it. In the wintertime, I always want something that's a little bit more warming. So I like to make bone broth stews, where I take either chicken bones or I could take grass-fed beef bones. I cook those up, get the ligaments, the bone marrow, the gelatin, all the good stuff out of the broth. And then I load it up with non-starchy vegetables, things like kale, collard greens, broccoli, cauliflower. You can even put in some carrots, right? So carrots have a lot of fiber. Again, watching your carbohydrate load, but putting a little bit of them in there really makes the super stew smell great. You put in onions, garlic in there, put in herbs. I like to put a lot of sea vegetable in there, like kelp or dulce. You get tons of iodine out of that. And again, it adds to the overall flavor of the whole soup. And so that's fantastic. You can make desserts, for example, with coconut butter and raw chocolate, right? Tastes fantastic. It's a coconut cacao butter ball, right? So raw chocolate's called cacao. So coconut cacao butter ball. There's all kinds of recipes and blogs that use this ketogenic approach, and you can make a ton of different things. So then going into dinner, again, you can have more soups or stews using these good fats. You can have organ meats, right? So, if you're brave enough, things like liver, fantastic for you. So absolutely amazing, loaded with good fats. If you're not, you can certainly go with some of the muscle meats. So using bison, grass-fed beef, lamb, venison, organic poultry. So have a good piece of meat. Again, for dinner, you probably want a little bit more protein, maybe about 25 grams to 30 grams of protein. So the general rule is have a piece of protein that's about the size of your fist. Combine it with steamed, sauteed, or raw non-starchy vegetables, and then load it up with oil. Put coconut oil, put butter on it, the pastured butter, extra virgin olive oil. I also like using fresh squeezed lemon and apple cider vinegar because the enzymes, the organic acids that are in those help pre-metabolize the meat and the vegetables. So they actually enhance the overall bioavailability of the nutrients in the food, and then load it up with herbs because, we really can't get enough antioxidants into our system. So loading it up with things like Italian herbs, basil, oregano, thyme, things like turmeric or ginger. We want to really make a habit out of utilizing a lot of these herbs. This is really what we want to go with. And then for dinner, we just rotate out different types of clean meat. So we don't have to use the same meat all the time. We can rotate out different types of clean meat, lots of different vegetables that we can rotate out, utilizing different good oils. So one day we might use olive oil as a topping. The next day we might use pastured butter. The next day we might use something like hemp oil or flax oil. The next day we might just cover everything with coconut oil after it's cooked, right? And so, we can continue to rotate meats, vegetables, and oils so we never get bland and our body never gets oversensitized to any one food source.
All right, man. Well, you're making me hungry. I know that for sure. I just want to take a step back and kind of get real here for a second. As you probably see, like I do, it's one thing to gradually work on this type of diet and a year, 2 years, 5 years down the line, be eating the way that you most likely do and the way that I do. But I commonly run into challenges with people who are eating a high grain diet. They just can't imagine living life without a sandwich or without some toast in the morning with their eggs. Carbohydrate addiction is very real, and it can be very difficult to overcome. So what are some tips that you have for people who are eating bread already or still eating bread and eating cereals and carbohydrates to actually make this shift and maybe to make it a little bit easier?
Brian, that's a really good question. I know for myself, I grew up on the typical American diet, which was all grains and pasteurized dairy. For breakfast, it was cereal with milk. For lunch, it was some sort of a sandwich. And then for dinner, it was pasta or pizza, And so I grew up in this high carbohydrate diet, and it ended up making me very, very sick. I suffered with severe irritable bowel syndrome and chronic brain fog and attention deficit disorder. And making these nutrition changes absolutely revolutionized my life. And I know for myself, I didn't really understand the ketogenic diet. I just started focusing on what made me feel better. And I noticed as I ate more of the fats, I felt a lot better. And as I took the carbohydrates out of my diet, the more carbohydrates I took out, the better I felt. And so for the average individual that's out there, I think the first thing you got to do is just, understand that it's certainly possible that you can live without the breads, without the grains. So you got to have that vision first off. And then number two is I would just say start, again with breakfast. Okay. So take the cereal out and try to make breakfast a really good high fat meal. If you start with that, you start your day out like that, you'll notice that you're a lot less hungry. When you have a high carbohydrate breakfast, you're typically going to be hungry throughout the day. And so start with breakfast. Again, if you're a coffee drinker, do the coffee with coconut oil, butter, right? Or do the hot chocolate with the coconut milk. Start like that and see if it's possible, okay? And then you go on from there, okay? Then you just try to make the best decisions and the best choices you can throughout the day. And I'll tell you, one thing that has really helped a lot of my clients is just keeping something like MCT oil or coconut oil around. And so I tell them to have, a thing of coconut oil right at their office. So, if they feel a little bit down, if they you just feel a little bit sluggish, your brain isn't firing real well, just take a little bit, just a teaspoon of the coconut oil, maybe some water, okay? Make sure they're hydrated. Make sure they get that coconut oil in. And again, the great thing about the coconut oil is your body is able to metabolize it very quickly into these ketones, and immediately your brain starts noticing the effects and you start feeling a lot better. So that's a recommendation I give for people. Just keep that coconut oil around. And, especially if you're craving sugar, just, drinking water with a lemon is a great way to help kick that desire. You can even do water with lemon and a little bit of stevia in there. So it's like sort of a lemonade. But another great thing is just a scoop of coconut oil oftentimes knocks out that craving.
Yeah, and for people who haven't used coconut oil, it takes a little bit of getting used to just sort of eat it off of a spoon, although it mixes well in protein shakes, and you can certainly cook with it. I've found there's actually a whole coconut product, a raw whole coconut product that is more like a coconut butter, which is sort of somewhere in between. It only has about 1 gram of sugar. It's loaded with fiber per 2 tablespoons, and it's a little bit more palatable for people who find just eating coconut oil to be a little bit different.
Yeah, I would agree. Coconut butter is like a dessert.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like eating chocolate almost. So how do you know when you're in ketosis? Let's say somebody starts making some of these changes, but they're diabetic, they're insulin resistant, their blood sugar is maybe controlled with medications, or maybe it's still elevated. It's going to take some time, obviously, to become adapted and to actually get into a keto adapted state and to be in ketosis. How can you measure that? How can you know at home that you're actually in ketosis?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that really also brings us into the topic of understanding the difference between natural ketosis and pathological ketoacidosis. And so first thing is that there's really 3 ways to measure ketone formation in the body. There is a breath test, there's a urine test, and there's a blood test. So the breath, when you do the breath test, it measures acetone. Urine measures acetoacetate levels, and the blood looks at beta-hydroxybutyric acid, which is really the major form of ketone that your body's going to use for energy. So blood measurements are definitely the most accurate, but the testing's also more expensive. So it's like $5 a strip, whereas urine testing is very, very cheap. And so typically I'll tell my clients to do the blood test like once or twice a week and to do the urine test on a regular basis. And I'll explain how this works. But all 3 of the areas are good to understand. The breath test right now is not, from my understanding, is not something that an average individual can get over the counter, get access to the breath test at this point, but there's more research being put into that. So basically the blood spot test is really a skin prick, kind of like testing your blood sugar, very similar. And you just get a keto measurer and basically it measures ketosis. And so the measurement level for light nutritional ketosis is going to be 0.5 to 1.0 millimoles per liter on meters. So the measurement is millimoles per liter. Okay, and so light nutritional ketosis would be between 0.5 and 1.0 millimoles per liter. The average individual, particularly the average individual with metabolic disease or somebody that's not on a high good fat diet, is going to be like 0.01, right? They're really not going to measure out for any usable ketones, okay, because they're in full sugar burning mode. But as you start to follow this plan, you'll notice that oftentimes, for a diabetic individual, it might take a week or two. For somebody that's fairly healthy, I guess you could say, they can enter into light nutritional ketosis in a matter of 2 to 3 days. Now, it's going to typically take about 2 weeks, 2 to possibly 3 weeks, or if you have severe metabolic disease, perhaps 4 to 6 weeks to get into stable, optimal ketosis. That's going to be 1.5 to 3.0 millimoles per liter. So again, light nutritional ketosis, 0.5 to 1.0 millimoles per liter. Stable, optimal ketosis range, 1.5 to 3.0 millimoles per liter. Now, where does this differ from ketoacidosis? Well, ketoacidosis, which is a pathological state that people with very severe type 1 diabetes or type 2 that's just uncontrolled and it's just off the charts and they can't get any sugar into their system. These are people who are going to be like 20 to 25 millimoles per liter. Okay, so it's like 10 times more than somebody who's in normal ketosis. And so it's an extreme physiological state. So the average individual really does not need to concern themselves with that. Okay, you're not going to get there. And so again, one of the common questions that I also get is with urine ketosis. So urine ketosis shows the amount of ketones that are not being used through metabolism. So if you're not using the ketones, just like sugar, your body's going to either, with sugar, it'll either put it into fat cells or it'll urinate it out. And so with ketones, it just urinates it. Okay. And so some people will be in ketosis, yet only show low levels of ketones on their urine strips. Others will show high levels. And really what it depends upon is how much energy you're expending. So if you're working out, you're exercising, physical work, things like that, clearly, and your body's in a keto adapted state, clearly you're going to use more ketones as energy. Okay. If you are more sedentary, right, for a certain period of time, then your next urination, you'll probably have more ketones. And that just makes sense because you're not using as much energy. So I tell people, don't really, don't put too much stress, I guess you could say, into the urine strips. There again, it really has to do with how your body is utilizing the ketones. And so the blood test is really a more accurate measure, but the urine test will tell you if your body's producing the ketones or not. Like you would naturally expect your ketones to be higher in the morning time because obviously you're sleeping overnight. And so that urine test should show with higher levels of ketones than perhaps after a workout. So that's just a good way of really testing the ketones and really testing it on a daily basis. So those are a couple ways of understanding whether you're in ketosis or not. Another great way is if you're able to fast, if you're able to go 12 hours and maybe up to 16 to 18 hours without eating, and as long as you're staying hydrated and you feel good, you feel stable, your brain feels good, your energy feels good, your emotions feel real balanced and stable, that's a positive sign that your body's in ketosis, that your body's very good at producing energy under this fasted state.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think what you mentioned about the difference between ketosis, dietary nutritional ketosis, and ketoacidosis is an important point because when, for our diabetics who are listening to the summit, when they go into their endocrinologist's office or their primary care doctor's office and telling them that they're using a ketogenic diet, they're not going to get very favorable reviews on that because there's a fear in the medical community, the conventional medical community, about ketoacidosis, which is much more common in type 1 diabetics, obviously, who aren't producing insulin at all, and it's an uncontrolled ketosis that can become very dangerous. As you mentioned, Dr. Jockers, what you're describing is nowhere near that state. It's a very safe level of ketosis where your body is burning ketones for fuel, and it's well in control of that. Measuring the urine ketones can be very inaccurate, as you mentioned, but I like your solution. The challenge with, of course, testing it through the blood is if you're doing that every day, it can be a little costly at a few dollars a pop for test strips. We've experimented with several meters to test both glucose and ketones. I don't know if you have any feedback on that. One that we've used with some success is called the Precision Extra. It tests both glucose and ketones and seems to be pretty accurate. Yep. Have you used that meter? Do you have any recommendations for ketone meters?
Yeah, that's exactly the one that I recommend. That one's really good. And what you'll also notice, I didn't mention this last time when I was talking about ketones, is that your blood sugar will be stable. And so you'll notice really a good stabilization of blood sugar. It'll be between 60 and 90. And that's really ideal. In fact, for many individuals, they're able to really stay very stable in that 60 to 70 range, which means insulin is low. And that's really anti-inflammatory. It's fantastic. Now, I've noticed that not everybody's able to get down that low for a number of different factors. If their gut if they're a little bit dysbiotic in their gut, they're going to have higher blood sugar because they're going to have a little bit more stress in their system, or maybe they're working a stressful job, or they have a stressful relationship. Blood sugar is typically going to be a little bit higher. But, when you're noticing that your blood sugar is staying very stable like that, you're not having the jumps, and it's staying in that 60 to 90 range, that's really good. That's solid.
Awesome. So for people who are ready to take the leap and to get on a ketogenic diet and to take some of the steps that you went over today, what are some of the challenges that they might run into, or that they might expect, and if you have any solutions for some of those challenges along the way that might help them get through these hurdles as they're getting on a ketogenic diet?
Yeah, absolutely. So some people get on the diet and immediately they feel amazing. But unfortunately, I wish it was the case for everybody. Some people feel miserable when they first start. And the cases that I've had the most trouble with are people that have, number one, dysbiosis, meaning bad microorganism balance in their gut. So they may have a candida or like something like a clostridium in high counts, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, things like that. So really addressing the gut, getting the gut healthy, taking things like probiotics or perhaps different supplements that help kill off small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, this overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine. So taking some specific supplements that will help destroy bad microbes and help repopulate good, healthy microbes is very, very important for individuals that are dealing with that. The other big thing is people that have cortisol dysregulation. So their adrenals are fatigued. So taking adaptogenic herbs, things like ashwagandha, rhodiola, we talked about things like green coffee bean extract, holy basil. These are all very, very helpful for helping modulate the adrenals, helping balance them, and helping strengthen them. And so if we can get our adrenals balanced and we can get our gut healthy and strong, then getting into ketosis is a lot easier and a lot more enjoyable. A couple of other things. Sometimes people are very constipated. They're not using their bowels enough, moving their bowels enough. And so they have a high microbial load. So perhaps doing some enemas or some colon cleanses or colon hydrotherapy can be really beneficial. And they'll notice that they feel a lot better after doing that, and they're able to get into ketosis more effectively doing that. Also, doing just simple things like oil pulling, where you take a little bit of coconut oil, swish it around your mouth for about 15 to 20 minutes and spitting it out. That will help reduce microbial load in your body. It will help reduce inflammation. And I found that when people do that they just feel better throughout the day, and they're able to handle ketosis more effectively. They're able to gradually move into that with a lot more ease. Other than that, I would just say, again, keep MCT oil, coconut oil around. So that way, if you do feel like you're crashing a little bit, you just take a little bit of that, and you'll notice that your energy stays strong. Your brain feels better. And, final last tip is really is just making sure you're meal planning correctly, that you're not trying to make it up on the spot, but instead you go into your day already kind of knowing what you're going to do for your meals. So planning ahead of time plays a huge role with this.
And I'll tell you, one of the best resources I've found for helping to plan some meals is your website, drjockers.com, Jockers. That's drjockers.com. And I've borrowed more than a few recipes from your site because you've got an extensive list of recipes, some great tips, and really helps when you're trying to make this real and practical. So, Dr. Jockers, any last tips before we wrap up our session here for the 2014 Preventing and Reversing Diabetes Summit.
Yeah, the last thing I just want to leave listeners with is, if you have a health goal, you can accomplish it. And I think, one of the greatest things you can do for yourself is make it a regular habit to get yourself inspired, whether it's watching videos on YouTube, reading something inspirational, whatever it is, maybe thinking of, a certain thought. I know for some individuals, it's just going in and looking and watching their kids sleep. Something that inspires you, that's moves you beyond yourself. When we fail or when we give up following different programs and different things like that, I find that it's really a lack of inspiration. And so if you make it a daily habit of getting yourself inspired and in state, for me, I don't even want to leave my house unless I feel like I'm ready to save people's lives and make a difference in the world. And so if you just create a regular habit of getting yourself inspired and in state, you will have so much more success reversing chronic disease and living out your full potential. So you can do it.
Well, that was absolutely phenomenal. And I appreciate your time today. I'm sure all of our listeners appreciate your time and your energy and the passion that you put into your work and what you shared with us today. I'm going to go have some coconut oil and some bone broth vegetable stew here in a few minutes. But before we wrap up, I just want to mention that if you want to own this presentation or any of the other presentations that are part of the 2014 Preventing and Reversing Diabetes Summit, you can purchase them by clicking the link to the All Access package in any of the emails you receive from us. The All Access package is going to have all the audios, the videos in MP3 and MP4 format, as well as something very special we've created, which is a Clinical Pearls book for each presentation. We've gone through and taken detailed notes on each talk and compiled all the highlights, all the important and clinical points to help you take action immediately. So go ahead and click on that link in your email for the All Access package, and that way you'll own this information forever and you can go back over it again and again and really put it to good use. Dr. Jockers, I want to thank you again for taking the time to share this information from your heart. I know you're busy, and it truly is life-changing. So God bless you, brother, and thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks so much, Brian. It was an honor to be on with you today.